challenging.
Excellent, thank you for that. Just to let you know again, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. I can see they're filling up, and we will get to them at the end of after all the questions have been asked. But before we go on to that, I'm going to direct this at the candidates directly each. So if I can just ask you all for a description of your personal journey and what involvement with space debris and the space environmental issues, what really brought you into looking to tackle these problems? And I'll start that one with Dins.
Well, it was more by, I would say, luck. It was certainly opportunistic. So 20 years ago, I was looking to complete my career in the Royal Air Force. I joined as an air defence specialist by choice, and I selected RAF Fylingdales as my final tour of duty in 1999, so that I could spend some time studying to leave the Royal Air Force. Well, it took me a further 17 years to leave the Royal Air Force because I was so enthused about the mission that RAF Fylingdales was doing. I was lucky enough to do some work in the US on some military missions there, and then when I came back to the UK, back into working at Fylingdales and beyond. So yeah, stumbled into space debris by chance, I shall say, which probably happens to most people. The subject matter, the beauty of it is every corner you turn, you learn something new, you find out something more, and it opens up dozens more questions. So it just sort of fed the nosiness inside me, the inquisitiveness of myself. And it's just a fascinating journey, it really has been.
Anirudh, would you like to go next?
Yep. So I started my journey as a university student, was building satellites, from a student satellite team, and that's how I started. And then we started our university's first student satellite club, and then we wanted to build a nanosatellite mission, which was a part of ISRO's student satellite program. And then we were looking for payloads, and we were looking for solving certain problems. So that's when we were brainstorming with a lot of ideas. So at one point of time, we had a person whom we spoke to, and then apparently, he lost the satellite when a space junk, it was a collision problem which was hit. So there was a debris which was hit. The debris hit a satellite, so his satellite was apparently lost. And then we thought that why not we solve this problem? And then we started thinking deep about this particular issue, and then we found that this is an issue that needs to be solved right now. So we started working on this, and then we started a company here in India, and now we are having a technology demonstration mission by the end of 2021, where we'll be deploying first technology demonstration satellite, which will be demonstrating. So it's more of an optical based payload that we have on our satellite, which will be tracking the existing debris, and then we get the data from that and then calibrate the sensors accordingly with the data that we have, and then use this technology to track the debris that are not yet tracked by the ground-based sensors, or that has limitations from the atmospheric perspective. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And Harriet?
Yeah, so my journey into the wonderful world of space junk, I guess, has been a little non-traditional, but I'm not sure there is a traditional path into this world. When I graduated university, Astroscale didn't even exist, right? I actually spent the first part of my career working in finance. I had a passion for space, but didn't realize that it was something I could do. Honestly, I thought that space was reserved for astronauts and rocket scientists. And as a mathematician / finance person, it took me a long time to realize that there's a whole host of opportunities in the space sector. And that was something that I kind of only really realized relatively recently, thanks to organizations like the Space Generation Advisory Council, which supports students and young professionals connect to the wider space sector. Yes, I kind of decided that finance wasn't for me. Went back to school, spent a year studying planetary science, and that really reignited my passion for space. And then it was at that time that I learned more about Astroscale, the commercial space sector, and I've been really lucky to be able to combine my passion for the space industry with my financial background with the work that I do at Astroscale.
Excellent, thanks for that. So again, I'll put my best Martin impression on here. So Martin wrote back to me to say, It was a bit of a roundabout journey for him getting into space. He came through the Ministry of Defence analysis software for RAF Tornadoes many, many years ago. Sorry, I did an extra many there, Martin. They basically looking at the electronics and the software and then up into the Internet of Things. And he realized the potential for applying knowledge to the tiny satellite platforms. And that is why Ambasat has came around with himself and his company there for that. I do have a question that's came in here, which we have for Martin, which I just want to throw out there for him, since he's unable to do because he gave us the answer earlier when we sent it to him. So he was asked about space debris, if it can directly affect his business and spacecrafts, and if there's any preventative measures when launching. But what I asked him was just to give a bit more information as well. So if you give me a moment, I'm going to go through and read the first part to answer that question, then a little bit more about Ambasat for him. So with that, above all, we want to make a positive contribution to space exploration and provide our next generation of scientists and engineers with tools and capabilities to find solutions to the environmental, social, and economic problems that we face on the planet today. So the design of satellites and rigorous ground-based environmental acceptance testings based upon established acceptance tests and procedures. They're striving for a disposal process which provides over 95% probability of a successful spacecraft disposal. And at Ambasat, they're actually looking to make a 100% deorbit disposability. So with him, they've built this into their designs and everything they're doing. The space debris in the environment is quite central to what they're looking at for that. And you can find out more details on the Ambasat website for that. And the Space Safety Coalition website under the document titled Best Practices for the Sustainability of Space Operations for that. So thank you for sending that one across for me, Martin. Moving on to the next question we have here. Is there a rough involvement, especially from governmental, when it comes to tackling these issues, or is it just the independent companies that are sort of looking to do that? So I'll go to Harriet to start with, given Astroscale's.
Yeah, sure thing. So I think one thing that I find encouraging is space debris is definitely becoming an issue that more people, at least in the space industry, are aware of. I find it rare these days to listen to a space webinar or go to an event where the issue of space debris and sustainability isn't raised, which I think is really encouraging. You know, the first thing you've got to do is be able to acknowledge or at least be aware of the problem, right? There's a number of international initiatives around the world that are looking at taking this seriously and looking at developing policies on an international and national level. So one example is the UN's Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, which has recently drafted its long-term sustainability guidelines. So that's more on the kind of the nation level. There's a number of international organizations such as the IADC, which is the Interagency Debris Committee, I believe. I'm going to get into a lot of acronyms and I'm probably going to forget what they stand for. But that is, again, an international group made up of space agencies around the world looking at addressing and understanding the space debris issue. There's also organizations like CONFERS, and for the life of me, I can't remember what that stands for. But that is more of an industry body that is looking to develop best practices for on-orbit servicing companies such as Astroscale. So if we're going to address this problem by developing innovative missions that are going up and removing pieces of debris, how do we do that safely? How do we make sure that there is transparency and confidence in what these missions are doing? So it's a real combination of governments pushing forward in terms of policy, but also industry taking responsibility and trying to be proactive. So there's more that we can do, but I'm optimistic that we're heading in the right direction.
There's some very good points there from Harriet, and I think the key element there is the fact that it's his industry that seems to be leading the way at the moment. Of course, their business survival in some instances relies on the survivability of space. And there have been some great things that companies have done in the past. I mean, OneWeb was a great example, and we don't know what their future is at the moment, but they, you know, their operational model wasn't based on the optimum level for their equipment. Normally Earth observation satellites would sit in their 600 to 800 kilometer belt. Communications, they might be at geo or they might be lower depending on the sort of mission they're doing. But OneWeb seriously looked at the fact that the optimum level for operations was actually quite congested. So their operational level was raised to 1,200 kilometers, and that's where they were going to operate from. And they had a very active plan to deorbit. So industry in some ways is leading the way, but of course it just takes one rogue to cause a problem. And we don't fully appreciate certain countries and how they initiate their space laws, their space plans, their registration and licensing. So there just needs to be greater coordination, both internationally, below that copious level, UN copious level, but actually between national governments, national space agencies need to be talking more. And there needs to be, I will use that phrase, a space traffic management plan of the future, which will give the industry the best resources that they can have, the best opportunities that they can have, but also ensure the sustainability. Because at the end of the day, the industry isn't their goal to mess up space, but also it isn't their responsibility for the whole space picture. So that's where it should sit with governments to actually sort this out.
So to add on to what they said, so I would like to mention one point. So in the early days of aviation, so we saw this problem of planes getting crashed due to some accidents and congestions. But then when it comes to space, why didn't we do the same thing, and why didn't we realize this problem at an early stage and bring some solution? Like in the aviation industry, we got something called the air traffic control, but why not in space? So we need such a solution where governments has to come and start the initiatives and help, and there needs to be a synergy between government and the industry where we could together solve this particular problem right now, and head and lead this way to bring a space management solution in near future. So when it comes to the national level, with what India is doing right now, so India has recently started a program called Project Netra, so which aims to set up radars, telescopes across the country, and then track the space debris up to 10 centimeter in size, which will help ISRO to have a lot of capabilities in knowing what is happening with the space assets. Yeah.
So thank you. Going on with that, you've all said that basically the key word is basically a buzzword at the moment, whether it be government, whether it be anything, sustainability. So now sustainability, beforehand, it used to just be about what we can do on Earth to try and make things easier. But now when we're talking about sustainability and prevention, how are these critical for future space missions? Anirudh, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. Like Hirit mentioned about, every single person on the earth is dependent on space technologies. We're using space technologies for everything from finance to Google Maps that you have on your phone, everything. So it is very crucial for future space missions. So when it comes to sustainability, like we mentioned, and we had, all of our discussion was revolving around not having a proper data set right now or data points right now to understand what is happening in space. So that's the major problem right now, and this problem should be solved in form of bringing up a solution like a space traffic management solution that could potentially solve this particular problem for future space missions. And right now space is heading towards $1 trillion industry, and there are a lot of new actors, new space companies coming in, launching new technologies, and there is a lot of explorations going on. There is a lot of buzz in the space industry right now than it was before, and you see about the mega constellations right now, by OneWeb or SpaceX or Amazon. So there is a lot of trend going on in the space industry right now. I guess it is very crucial to understand this aspect of space situational awareness or sustainability for future space missions, which would be a base for operating future satellites in space.
Thanks, Dins.
To be honest, all I can do is echo what Anirudh has said. Actually, space provides so many good things for us. To paraphrase Monty Python a little, what has space done for us? Well, it's provided us with a timing mechanism that supports our entire community. Yeah, but apart from that, what has space done for us? And space has been its own enemy, for one of the better phrases, because it's infused itself in society without society noticing. all of a sudden society has noticed and suddenly realized how important it is to them, but they're not investing in the need to sustain that. They just see it as, well, it's big space, and we can throw stuff up in there, to put it lightly. Space has got a lot of space, therefore we should be able to fit a lot of things in, but it needs to be done in an orderly fashion. Talked to 100 years ago in London, I'm sure the people thought the streets of London were congested. COVID aside, the streets of London were far more congested now, but life still goes on, and we need to work out a way to be able to manage space, to make it sustainable, and to keep those benefits for society coming through to us, so that everybody continues to benefit from it.
Yeah, so I think Anna-Ruud and Dins have raised some really important points when it comes to thinking about kind of environmental sustainability. The other angle that I want to put out there is thinking about commercial sustainability, and I think that's something that's really important for the space industry. Is, you know, we kind of, for some reason, think that the space industry is special, right? We do it because it's awesome, but at the same time, when it comes to commercial business, we have to do it because it is economically viable. And I think that is something that is really important when we think about how we address the problem of space debris, because it's all very well Astroscale building the best debris removal mission in the world, right? But if no one wants to pay for it, and no one sees the value of it, then it's not going to go anywhere, right? So that's why, as a company, we are very much focused on tackling this challenge from a technology perspective, but also from a business and a policy perspective, because we have to demonstrate the commercial incentives for space debris mitigation and removal, right? So that comes down to really making sure that satellite operators are aware of the risks. That comes down to the space situational awareness piece, understanding the value that debris removal and other actions can bring satellite operators, both on an individual level, but also when we think about the environment, right? So we've really got to think about this from an economic perspective when we want to be sustainable, as well as an environmental aspect, because otherwise we're going to see exactly what we did with the Apollo program, where it was awesome to tick the box, and then we didn't go back for 50 years or even longer, right? So we've really got to make sure that there is a way that we can be sustainable in a commercial sense too.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. So again, I'll open this one up to the whole panel, and I'll start with Harriet for answering. Apart from space debris, is there any other space environmental concerns that the public should be aware of? At the moment, space debris is one of the big things that we all hear about, but is there anything else that's out there that you guys are seeing that the general public are missing and should actually know about?
Oh, it's a good question, actually. I mean, I think that there's a lot of things that the space industry has to be aware of, right? One thing that I think we've alluded to here is I think space has got a bit of a PR problem. We really need to be better at promoting the value that space has to people on Earth, because it's very easy for people to feel, you know, disenfranchised with the space industry when you think, oh, well, great, you know, NASA's sending people to the moon, but what does that mean for me, right? We need DINS to continue to advocate for what space has done for us, right? So one, there's a PR problem in terms of how we can be more proactive. And I think kind of going back to that kind of idea that space is special for some reason, I think we have to be really careful about when we think about space as it being this separate, different other thing. You know, space isn't different, and to put it mildly, you know, we're going to be the same idiots, I'll say, in space as we are on Earth if we don't do things differently, right? You know, and so this is why I think, you know, we've really got to see this moment to be responsible and sustainable in space, because we've seen where that can go if we don't think about those problems on Earth, right? And so I hope that we can be more proactive and when we can do more about that issue across the board.
Excellent. Annie Ridge, you want to go next?
Yep. So space is actually a common resource, like she said, and there are almost 60 plus spacefaring countries right now doing a lot of things in space. And space has no traffic rules, nothing. People are doing whatever they want. Our companies are launching satellites, and industries are launching satellites. So there are mega constellations coming up. So one thing that I would like to mention is that when they are operating this mega constellation, so all these satellites are equipped with propulsions or thrusters. So they have to maneuver their satellite at certain point of time. So I think that while they maneuver their satellite, there is certain orbital parameters that is changed, and then again they have to come while tracking these things. Again, they have to come from ground zero. So I think this is a major problem apart from space debris, is what I think. Yeah.
Excellent. And then
One thing we tend to ignore is the space environment itself. So we talk about the man-made hazard of debris and how we're cluttering it, but actually space situational awareness, which is one of the key buzzwords, SSA, for understanding what's going into, coming out of and happening in space, requires three key elements. Space events and tracking, to understand what those objects are going into space and what they're doing in space. For want of a better phrase, an intelligence function, understanding why they're there, what they're doing, why they might change direction, what the geopolitical idea is, what the schedule is of the satellite operators, etc. And the final piece is what we call lovingly space weather, the space environment itself, whether or not the sun hiccups and how that affects things that happen. So we need to understand more about the space environment, and it's still a relatively new science, and they're investing a little bit more into it. But when the sun does belch and it fires in the direction of the Earth, it has had some fairly significant effects historically. So everyone talks about the Carrington effect in the 19th century and the Ottawa storm in 2000 in the 20th century. I think it was 1989. The Ottawa storm took out a huge proportion of northeast North America, and what people forget is it also shifted something in the region of 1,200 satellites in low Earth orbit from their trajectory. So all of a sudden, that's 1,200 objects traveling around the Earth at 17,500 miles an hour, and they've just changed their position, and we need to start tracking them again. So yeah, we need to understand more about the effects the sun has on our orbital environment, and also the effect, how we can mitigate it or be prepared for it, both terrestrially and on orbit as well.
excellent. Thank you very much for that. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to open up the questions here and go through from the attendees. You'll be delighted to know there's about 27, so we'll try and get through as many as humanly possible in the next 10-15 minutes that we've got you here. So the first one we've got that came in was from Nicole Kaplan. Originally it was aimed at Harriet and was asking, but Martin might want to reply to this by text as well to me, and I can read his response. Harriet mentioned the issue of small objects that we aren't able to track, but from what I understand, new satellites, no matter how small, now need to be registered and assigned an object ID. How true is this?
Yeah, so I think I'll defer to Dins and Martin a lot on this question, but there is the UN has an international registry where in an ideal world, all satellites that are launched into space are registered. Whether that happens in practice or not is something to be determined. And I think there's an important point to make here, which is that, space is not just a commercial environment, it's also a military environment. And so there are, military satellites where, those will not be registered and that information will not be publicly available. But I welcome Dins, Martin and others' contributions on this as well.
Well, all satellites, as far as I understand, all satellites are registered with the UN, but it can take 6 months or more for them to appear in an updated register. It's not updated as regular as the launches, and it doesn't need to actually stipulate what that satellite is doing. So again, as far as I understand, the military satellites will be on that register. It won't be telling you what they're doing per se, but there are great websites out there where they can actually keep an eye on that. But when it comes to the point about the ID as well, there is no ID requirement as such. The legal requirement is for them to be registered, full stop. The fact they appear in the US Air Force catalogue, Space Track, which is regurgitated through Celeste Track, is A, to help inform the military community for the missile warning mission, and B, help the space community to track objects in space. But not all objects that are in space or registered actually remain or are regularly tracked and updated in that catalogue, because there is no requirement to maintain a catalogue. It seems to have fallen into the lap of the US military because they have the best system to be able to do it at the moment. But as far as I understand, there is no legal requirement.
Okay. And from Martin, he said to me, he's saying, with Ambasat, because their project is to have the universities and the schools working towards smaller satellites, each of the 200 individual satellites that they're looking to launch will all need to be individually registered. So following up with what Dins and Harriet said on that one. So thank you, Nicole, for that one. Now we have Nick House. So with the focus on the Starlink constellation getting so much attention from the major news sites, what is on the impact of the astronomical observation disruption? But there's so little focus on the actual potential threat of collision and debris with the amount going up. Is this a major issue with communication at a government level, or is it just large corporations and commercial entities being too afraid to make a comment on this? And I'll open this up to whoever would like to take it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say right now that the FCC, which is the Federal Communications Commission, which is a licensing body in the US, currently is discussing its debris mitigation guidelines. And so, you know, basically asking the industry and community for comment on what their rules should be for debris mitigation. And that is a very active discussion. So I think it is something that is being discussed. But I agree that, you know, we're coming back to this PR problem, right? Which, you know, we need to make the environmental challenges in space be more well known. And actually, you know, the topic of you know, the impacts to astronomy and stargazing from large satellite constellations, I think that's had a lot of media coverage. So maybe there's a lesson that we can learn from the astronomers in terms of, you know, how to portray their concerns and how that gets communicated.
Excellent. Dins, did you want to say something there?
I was just thinking, I mean, there's very little I can add to what Harriet said. She's absolutely right. We're not getting the messaging correct. I mean, it's very much a case of, you know, what you can see, you can complain about. So, you know, Starlink is polluting the site of quite an active global community, for want of a better phrase, whereas the risk to collision, it's not an actual, you know, it's a risk, it hasn't actually happened. So therefore it's not blocking the site of anything. So yeah, the astronomy community have got it absolutely correct, insofar as they're able to project, you know, their concerns, because, you know, I can literally step out onto my backyard and watch Starlink when they're flying nearby. I regularly watch the ISS when it's going through the UK, so you can see it with your eye. But the actual collision piece is a different matter, and that's the projection of risk, which is a lot harder to fight for. And if you look historically back at the community since 2009, the Iridium Cosmos collision, you know, they've been projecting the argument of the risk of collision, but there hasn't been one, so therefore people are ignoring it.
Thank you for that. I think one thing that everyone agrees here, that the space sector needs a bit more PR, a bit more marketing to actually show what it does and how it affects the real world. So for all those companies out there doing that, please, please, please keep doing it for all of us. Chris Jones has asked, are we better tracking from ground-based systems or from space-based systems when it comes to items in orbit?
So I would like to take this question now. So yeah, the ground-based systems right now, you know, they're using radars or telescopes that are placed across the globe, and these radars and telescopes are tracking space junk. I mean, they have capabilities to track space junk right now up to 2 centimeters. But then again, these systems have certain limitations when it comes to, I mean, difference between the space-based system and the ground-based system. Space-based system will not have certain limitations like atmospheric limitations. When you view something from space, the data that you get is much more higher, or the data points is much more higher than the ground-based ones. So I would not compare both of these two things, but then I would say that you know, a synergy between ground and space-based system would enhance the data quality.
Absolutely agree with Anirudh. Absolutely agree. It's not is one system better than the other. You need that toolbox selection to be able to get what you need, and then you need to have a way of fusing all that data. Ground-based systems would give you a certain amount of persistence. So companies like Exoanalytic Solutions have 300 plus telescopes observing objects above 8,000 kilometers. They've reduced the sun exclusion to about 6 hours in some instances, and their footprint means that there is very little weather exclusion for them. So they're watching the deep space objects almost persistently. The LEO objects are not being tracked persistently because A, the footprint of the sensors is quite broad. B, most of the sensors are in the northern hemisphere, so there's a huge part of the orbit that is being missed. And C, their mission is something completely different. So to fill the gaps, if you have a selection of ground-based and space-based systems, you get the ideal results.
Excellent, thank you. I've got a question here from Andre, who was asking, do you foresee a time when space debris will become visible, littering our night sky, similar to how we can see satellites at the moment?
I'd say to that, it already is visible. So if you think about the fact that there's about 2,000 operational satellites in orbit, there's about 6,000 non-operational satellites in orbit. So you think about when you look at the night sky and you see a satellite passing overhead, chances are that that's actually a piece of space junk, not an operational satellite.
Okay, so we've got 2 or 3 left, and then we'll get to that. So this one I think was towards Astroscale when Harriet was, who should pay for the service, i.e. should it be the customer from the satellites or the government to track the junk and remove the junk?
Yeah, I love this question. It's a tough one, right? If it was an easy answer, people would have been doing debris removal for yonks, right? But it's very important, right? Because we start to understand and appreciate that space debris is a problem that we need to do something about. And then you ask around, okay, well, who wants to pay for it? And everyone looks the other way, right? And so we really need to look at developing those commercial incentives and really demonstrating the value of debris removal. The way that Astroscale thinks about it, we break that down into 2 core markets. So the first is what we call active debris removal. So that's looking at removing pieces of space junk that are already up in orbit, where we're looking at primarily targeting in governments and in the institutional market, who are looking at protecting the orbital environment as a whole, right? And we've seen a number of agencies already looking at doing this. So Japanese Space Agency has announced its Address J mission, which is going to be looking at first inspecting and then in the future removing a Japanese upper stage. European Space Agency has also announced funding for its Clear Space mission, which is looking at doing something very similar in Europe. So we're starting to see, governments taking seriously and paying for these kind of debris removal services, which is really encouraging. And then on the commercial side, the way that we think about that is looking more at end-of-life services, so preventing the debris that is already up there. And then that's looking at targeting commercial satellite operators who have, are looking to launch satellites in the future, primarily satellite constellations, where you're having hundreds, if not thousands, of satellites operating in the same regime. And if you've got literally thousands of satellites at the same altitude in similar orbital planes, if one of your satellites fails unexpectedly, then you have basically a non-maneuverable dead rock floating around, getting in the way of your operational constellation. So when you start thinking about satellite constellations, it becomes more than just an environmental problem. It's also directly affecting your own operations, which is where you start to see the incentives to keep your own space clean so that you can keep using it.
Thank you very much for that. So first of all, I would like to thank everyone on the panel who's been here today and for those questions that's asked. And I'm sorry we couldn't answer all your questions. Just to let you know, we have put a survey on at the end. At the moment, this is the last of the last 4 planned webinars, but we are happy to do more. If you could put your suggestions down, whether that be on topics, people you would like to see. And with that, I know this has been very, very insightful in regards to space debris, so there may be something else we can do with it and see about getting the panel back. I would like to thank Harriet, Anirudh, Martin, Ralph.
Can I just say one quick thing before we close out?
Please.
I'd just like to advertise the fact that in the next 24 hours we'll be going live on a space careers with a job opportunity for developing orbital analysts for Northern Space and Security. So anybody who wishes to have a career in space, tracking objects in space, look out on Space Careers.
Excellent. Actually, on top of that, Martin, Harriet, and the rest of you, if you would love to put your LinkedIn profiles or anything in the main chat, please do so. Let the guys follow you if they're going to see Twitter handles, whatever you would prefer. We'll leave that open, and we'll keep the webinar open for the next sort of 5 minutes or so people can pick that up. But mostly, thank you very much for coming along and making these webinars as exciting as they are. So thank you very much.